Hi, I'm Mikerah, and I work on Eth2, mainly privacy-related stuff. Today will be an introduction to validator privacy and the problems space. I originally was going to talk about like networking stuff, but it turns out not many people are familiar with this, so I'll just introduce a higher level description of what needs to be done and the problems that you'll encounter. So first, I'll provide motivation. It might not be immediate, obviously obvious why you'd want validator privacy. After all, many people here espouse the virtues of transparency and being able to see everything, and hold people accountable. And I mean that's true. And for proof of stake, you do need a public system to hold people accountable in order to slash them and whatnot. However, we've seen in the real world that this isn't all that realistic, especially not only for users themselves on chain, but the people who take the time to get the resources and knowledge to secure the network. So to provide some real-world examples, mainly in the context of proof of work. So quick gist, with proof of work, you have these machines and you mine. So you know that this requires tons of energy, and there are like personal costs to this, right? So now you have like outside expenditure, but if you're in a hostile situation, governments could easily use this information to track down whether you're mining cryptocurrency. This can be an issue since if you have no other way to access crypto, like you don't have access to an exchange, nobody around you has crypto to buy to sell. Your only way is to just mine. So there are examples of countries like looking at energy usage levels in cities and towns and getting people that way. Since you have like physical hardware, it's easy to raid. All these issues arise in the real world. But in the context of proof of stake, now everything's virtualized. You no longer get these like real world problems where your equipment is seized because your computer is a general purpose machine. You can use it for whatever. They're not just going to seize your computer unless they have a reason to. And also you don't have this like extreme energy usage problem. However, you do get a new set of problems. Obviously, you get like bribery since it's proof of stake. There's blackmailing. We've seen this recently. There's a proposed attack that was published on ETH Research that proposed a potential like blackmailing attacks on validators. But then also, since everything is virtual and you're most likely doing this just over the regular internet, it's very easy to just track your activity for anybody really, a government or like a hostile group, maybe your friends if they want to play pranks on you. So this becomes a potential problem, especially if one of the goals of ETH2 is to ensure fairness and accessibility and censorship resistance. So these types of problems aren't easily solved with just mixers and Tor, which are like common approaches today for users. In fact, I don't even think miners don't really use like network level privacy. They might use like on-chain methods. But yeah, I hope like throughout the rest of the talk, I'll be able to convey that this validator privacy is like way more complex in the real world than it is currently, and that it's really like a full stack problem, ranging from the network layer to like on-chain layer as well. So before I go into details, I'll just like give a definition of validator privacy. I guess like many people here have a quick little like intuitive definition, which is like you want to stay private if you're a validator and you don't want like an adversary to know what you're doing, which I think is a fair definition. And I'll define it similarly. Like as a validator, you want to be able to control what information you convey to the world, whether that be how much money you're earning, being a validator, or whether you're using your own personal network, or whether you're using like a set of computers to validate. Yeah. So before going into sort of requirements, I'll try to present the idea of privacy notions and how they apply for validator privacy. Privacy notions let us define a set of privacy goals and properties that will enable us to compare different strategies and protocols for protecting privacy. And in doing this, you'll kind of get an intuition for how hard the problem space is for validator privacy. So informally, privacy notions are game-based definitions that are formalizations of privacy properties. For example, we all know, Tor lets you browse the internet anonymously. And what this really means is your ISP can see your IP address, but it doesn't see what you're looking at. So you're the sender, and what's being, unlinked is a message that you're sending, which is traffic to a website. And this notion is called sender message unlinkability. There's other concepts such as sender message observability, which means you don't see who's sending a message. And there are some cases in which you'd want to hide both the message and the sender. You might want to hide both the sender and the receiver, but keep the messages public. You might want to keep only this receiver private. So privacy notions are like these theoretical building blocks that like help us sort of get a feel of what we're trying to actually solve. And it gives us like a nice way to develop nice threat models and see whether like any improvements we're trying to add to a protocol actually does what we want it to do. So for validator privacy, there's a whole host of privacy notions that can really help in determining the requirements. There are some that might come off as like contradictory to another, considering the requirements for just Eth2 in general, if you're familiar with the protocol. For example, if I'm a validator and my threat model is I don't want the government to know that I'm participating, this kind of entails like multiple privacy notions. For example, you want sender message unlinkability. The problem with this is that in Eth2, you need to be able to attribute messages to validators in order to properly reward them and slash them. So this is kind of contradictory to sort of the goals of the protocol. But at the same time, you want to stay private. Another privacy notion that's relevant is sender-receiver unlinkability. This one isn't too bad, since Eth2 uses a gossip protocol. However, if you're dealing in the case where you have a global passive adversary, you might just end up. It's easy to track since they have a total view of the network, at least theoretically. Other privacy notions include repeated messages. So in Eth2, you're expected to stay online and send messages at particular times in a timely manner. However, this can be used to easily track you down. So say you're using like some fancy ACN that exists, but just by looking at the metadata, like how often you're sending messages, the lengths of the messages, like this could probably track you down to being a validator in Eth2. All of these specs are public and can be easily used to track you down. So in discussing this, it kind of leads us to what we want and what some properties that we might want for not only the networking layer, but what we might want like on-chain as well. So briefly, at the networking layer, considering these properties that we might want, you might want something that's like low latency. You might want something that's like low bandwidth. However, there are impossibility theorems that say you can't really get decent privacy with both at the networking layer. So there's trade-offs that you need to do at the network at that layer, considering ETH2's goals. And then at the consensus layer, where we can see everything, there's similar trade-offs. So it is possible to have fault attribution in a more anonymous fashion. However, that does increase, it does decrease, the scalability of the system a little bit, and can lead to, a more complex protocol. So in talking about these trade-offs, you'd be thinking, okay, what needs to be changed? I mean, honestly, a lot of it would need to be changed. But that's not really possible since there are test nets. People want it to launch like immediately. We all want ETH to go 1K or whatever. But the reality is like privacy needs to be designed from like the get-go, and retrofitting into a currently existing system is very hard because now you don't get like the best possible privacy that you possibly can for validators, which leaves like a huge segment of a potential cryptocurrency user sort of inaccessible. They might have to go through other ways to acquire ETH or become a validator. So like the current status of validator privacy in ETH2, it's all public. Just like no guarantees of anything. So sure, certain messages aren't directly associated with like an on-chain identity, but if you listen to the network, you can easily map messages to IP addresses to on-chain identities. So you can create this like panopticon of all of the validators and see what they're working on, see how much wealth they own, and especially if you've used like ENS, you could potentially map their like ETH1 identity to the ETH2 identity. And we already know that like ETH1 is being tracked by like chain analysis, Elliptic, and all those companies, so they can easily see like all of your activity. So I'll end the talk soon. And just for like future work, open questions, for those of you who are more privacy oriented and want to participate in ETH2, so some future work would be like prototyping and more implementation and discussion and research around how might we actually balance these like anonymity trade-offs at the network level with the goals of the system. Another open question is, people don't talk about this a lot, but once you add like anonymity or privacy into your protocol, you do end up changing some of the economics. Sure, it's possible to attribute fault in an anonymous context, but it's like a non-trivial problem, and this has some issues with slashing and accountability. So yeah, there's quite a few things. That's it.
Hey, Mikerah.
Hello.
Thanks. That was great. I was wondering whether you had any direct, actionable items that implementers can potentially work on for the hopefully imminent launch of ETH2.
So personally, I was planning on gathering a team of my own, and just so let you guys be implementers and actually work on stuff, and then I would just help out in terms of seeing what kind of solutions might work currently, and give recommendations in terms of actual implementation details to how we might approach this problem. So it's still kind of open. Yeah.
Okay, cool. One of the things that we were sort of discussing with a bunch of people would be that, I'm sure you know, I'm not sure if everybody does, but there's a validator client that connects to a beacon node.
Yeah.
The beacon node is your Geth parity, and validator client, that's what holds your keys. So if we're able to basically shuffle the connections between your validator client and a multitude of different beacon nodes, it makes it much harder for an adversary to DOS you, because they basically would have to DOS all the beacon nodes that you'd be potentially connected to. So that's one thing that we're currently thinking about at Lighthouse.
Yeah, so for that, wouldn't that, so then you, as a validator, wouldn't you kind of be like a light client of, we'd be more of a light client than a full node. I've heard like some discussions about whether there should be the case, like whether as a validator you should definitely own a beacon node. So I think that's something to take into account, because it does change like the real world properties and security of the system if everybody's still a validator client, but you know, a few beacon nodes are centralized somewhere. Yeah.
So any other questions? No. Thank you, Mikerah, thank you everyone for the listening.